The first day she arrived, the sky looked heavy, as though it understood what neither of them could say aloud. Elena stepped out of the taxi in a pale gray coat, her hair tied back neatly, her eyes somewhere far away. I hadn't seen her since the funeral, and, even then, she had moved through people like a ghost trying not to disturb the living. Now she was here, my late father's wife, the woman he loved in his final years, and I didn't know what to call her anymore. The house felt suddenly smaller as I carried her bags inside. The walls still carried my father's scent, old books, shaving soap, and the faint musk of tobacco. Every object seemed to hum with his absence. I caught her looking at his armchair, her lips parting slightly before she turned away. There was so much unsaid between us that even the silence felt fragile. "I hope this isn't inconvenient," she said softly as I set her suitcase down in the guest room. Her voice was calm, measured, yet the tremor beneath it betrayed her. "It's not," I replied, maybe too quickly. "It's good to have someone here again." That was a half-truth. The house had been too quiet for months, but now her presence filled it with a different kind of quiet, one weighted by grief and something unnameable. At dinner, she offered to cook, saying she needed to keep her hands busy. I watched her move around the kitchen like someone remembering choreography, careful, deliberate, a little lost. She asked where my father used to keep the spices, then laughed nervously when she realized how automatic the question was. We ate mostly in silence, the only sound the soft clink of utensils and the faint crackle of the old radio. She thanked me for the meal, though she had made most of it herself. Later that evening, I passed by the living room and found her standing before the mantelpiece, fingers tracing the edge of a framed photo, my father in his younger days, smiling at a fishing dock. She didn't notice me watching. Her lips moved slightly, forming words I couldn't hear. When she turned and saw me, she gave a small, apologetic smile. "I thought I'd forgotten how his voice sounded," she murmured. "But being here, it brings everything back." I wanted to say something comforting, but words felt clumsy in the air between us. Instead, I nodded, and she seemed to understand. That night, as I lay in bed, I could hear her faint footsteps moving down the hallway, slow, measured, restless. I imagined her pausing outside my father's study, maybe touching the doorframe the way I sometimes did. Both of us haunted the same house, carrying our grief in different silences. The next morning, I found her already awake, making tea by the window. The sunlight caught her face just enough to show how tired she looked, yet there was grace in it too, like a woman who had learned to endure pain quietly. She looked at me and offered a small smile. "Do you take sugar in your tea?" It was a simple question, but it felt like the first real bridge between us. It didn't happen all at once. The house simply started to sound less hollow. In the mornings, I would wake to the faint sound of running water and the gentle rhythm of her footsteps downstairs. Elena had a way of moving through the house that was careful yet steady, as if she were trying not to disturb whatever peace we were building. She'd begun leaving the windows open, letting in the smell of damp earth and the songs of sparrows that gathered by the fence. We didn't talk much, but we moved around each other easily now. She folded the laundry I forgot in the dryer. I refilled her tea without her asking. There was a wordless understanding between us that felt safer than speech. One afternoon, I came home early from work and found her kneeling by the garden, her hands deep in the soil. The sleeves of her shirt were rolled up, and her hair, usually pinned neatly, had come loose around her face. She looked lighter somehow. "I didn't know you gardened," I said, leaning against the porch railing. She smiled faintly, not looking up. "Your father used to plant tomatoes here every spring." I thought I'd keep it alive. The way she said keep it alive lingered in my mind long after. When she stood, brushing soil from her hands, I offered her a glass of water. Our fingers touched as she took it, just for a second, barely enough to notice, yet enough for something to shift inside me. That evening, it rained softly. The kind of rain that seems to hush the whole world. Power flickered once and went out entirely, leaving us in the dim amber light of candles. She laughed nervously. "Guest dinner's going to be improvisation tonight." We cooked together by candlelight, her chopping vegetables while I tried not to burn the soup. At one point, she reached over to guide my hand, showing me how to slice the onion thinner. Her fingers rested briefly on mine, warm, steady, and so close that I forgot what I was supposed to be doing. For a moment, she looked up at me, and the candlelight softened everything about her, the lines of fatigue, the sorrow in her eyes, the years that stretched between us. I could smell her perfume, something faint and floral, familiar but hard to name. Then she smiled, small, tired, but genuine. "You're getting better at this," she said. I smiled back, though my pulse betrayed me. When dinner was ready, we sat across from each other at the old kitchen table. The rain drummed gently on the roof. She poured wine into 2 mismatched glasses, and we ate in comfortable silence. Sometimes she'd glance up and catch me looking, other times I caught her doing the same. Neither of us mentioned it. Afterward, we cleaned up together. I noticed how she hummed under her breath, an old melody I recognized from my father's record collection. Later, as I passed by the living room, I saw her curled up on the sofa, a blanket around her shoulders, reading quietly. The soft lamplight wrapped around her like gold. Something inside me ached, not in a way that asked for more, but in the way a heart recognizes warmth after being cold for too long. We were still 2 people bound by loss, but for the first time, the house didn't feel haunted. It felt lived in. It felt like home. It was close to midnight when I heard her crying. The sound was faint, barely a whisper, but in a house this quiet, even grief had its own echo. I hesitated outside her door, not wanting to intrude. For weeks, Elena had carried herself with a calm so steady that I almost believed she had made peace with everything. But that night, her quiet sobs stripped away the illusion. I knocked softly. "Elena." There was a pause, then her voice gentle, tired. "I'm fine, Liam. Go back to sleep." I didn't. I pushed the door open a little. She sat on the edge of the bed, the lamplight low, her face hidden in her hands. On the nightstand lay a half-opened photo album, my father's face smiling faintly from its pages. "I can't seem to stop missing him," she whispered, not looking at me. "And yet, I also can't stop feeling angry." I sat down in the chair across from her, unsure what to say. She looked up, eyes red but steady. "He was a good man," she began. "But near the end, he wouldn't let me in. I kept telling myself he was just tired or afraid, but there were days he'd look at me like a stranger. And I hated that. I hated that I couldn't reach him." Her words cracked on the last sentence. I didn't interrupt. She pressed her palms together tightly, as if holding herself together. "I tried to stay strong," she continued. "Everyone expected me to. I told him I loved him, even when I wasn't sure he wanted to hear it anymore. And now he's gone, and I can't stop thinking, maybe I failed him. Maybe I failed both of us." The tremor in her voice pulled something raw from me. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on my knees. "You didn't fail him," I said quietly. "You were there. You stayed. That's more than most people can do when love gets hard." She gave a faint, broken laugh. "You sound like him when you say things like that." "I hope not," I said gently. "I'm trying to be better at listening." Her eyes softened. For a long moment, the air between us felt fragile but alive. Then, without thinking too much, I reached out and placed my hand over hers. Her skin was cool at first, then warm as she didn't pull away. "I just wish," she said after a pause, her gaze on our joined hands, "that someone had told me it's okay to not be strong all the time." I didn't answer. Instead, I squeezed her hand lightly, a quiet acknowledgement that no words could match. When she finally looked at me, her tears had stopped, though her eyes glistened in the soft lamplight. "Thank you," she said simply. I nodded. "You don't have to thank me." We sat there for a long while, 2 people surrounded by photographs, memories, and the faint hum of the night. The world outside seemed to pause for us. Eventually, she closed the album and exhaled deeply. "You should get some sleep," she murmured. "Only if you promise to try," I said, half smiling. She did. And as I left her room, the scent of her perfume, something faintly like lilies and paper, followed me down the hallway. It lingered longer than I expected, long after the house returned to silence. The days began to soften after that night. Something in Elena's voice changed lighter somehow, as if the weight she carried had shifted, even slightly. I noticed it in the way she moved through the house, No longer careful to stay invisible, no longer afraid to hum while she worked or open the windows wide enough for the breeze to sweep through. It was early spring. The first sunlight had returned to the valley, spilling over the garden where the tomato plants had started to sprout. I'd catch her outside most mornings, tending to them with quiet focus, her hair tied loosely at the back of her neck. Sometimes, I'd stand at the porch pretending to check my phone just to watch her, the way her hands brushed the leaves like she was greeting something living again. One morning, I brought her coffee. She smiled when she saw me. "You remembered, I take it black." I shrugged. "I'm observant." "You're kind," she corrected softly, taking the cup. Her fingers grazed mine, an unintentional touch, but enough to make the air between us feel warm despite the cool wind. Inside, the house no longer felt like a museum of grief. She had begun placing small things everywhere, a vase of fresh wildflowers on the table, a soft blanket draped over the sofa, framed sketches she'd drawn years ago but never hung. Every addition changed the rhythm of the space, turning it into something that felt lived in rather than mourned. Sometimes we'd talk over lunch, sometimes over silence. I learned that she used to teach literature at a small university before she met my father. Her eyes brightened when she spoke about books, how words could carry whole worlds inside them. "I stopped reading after he passed," she admitted once, tracing the rim of her teacup. "But lately, I've been thinking, maybe it's time I start again." "You should," I said. "You sound like someone who misses stories." Her eyes met mine, and for a moment, there was a pause too long to be casual. "Maybe I just miss being part of one," she said quietly. That line stayed with me all day. Evenings became gentler too. We'd sit on the porch sometimes, sharing the same blanket when the wind grew cold. The conversations drifted from small talk to deeper things about my father, about loneliness, about the strange ways people rebuild themselves after loss. Once, she told me she didn't know how to be cared for anymore. I didn't know how to answer that, so I simply offered her another cup of tea. When our hands touched, she didn't pull away. The sound of her laughter had started to return, not often, but enough to make me look up whenever I heard it. It was a quiet, unguarded sound, the kind that made ordinary moments feel rare. One evening, as the sky blushed pink over the fields, she turned to me and said, "This house feels different now." I asked, "Different how?" She thought for a while, her eyes tracing the line of the horizon. "It feels like it can breathe again." And I realized she wasn't just talking about the house. It was a Sunday afternoon, quiet and unremarkable, the kind of day that feels safe. Elena had gone into town to buy groceries, leaving me alone in the house. I decided to do something I'd been avoiding for months: clean out my father's old study. The room still smelled faintly of tobacco and dust, a stubborn echo of him. Papers sat in uneven stacks on the desk, his handwriting looping in the margins like ghosts caught mid-sentence. I opened the drawers one by one, sorting letters, receipts, bits of his life that no longer needed keeping. And then I found it. A plain white envelope, yellowed at the edges, tucked between two ledgers. My name wasn't on it, only hers. Elena. I shouldn't have opened it. I knew that. But something in me, the part still trying to understand who my father truly was, did it anyway. The letter was dated 3 weeks before he died. The handwriting was weaker than I remembered, jagged in places. His words were short, but heavy enough to change everything I thought I knew. He wrote about doubt. About feeling her love had grown distant. That sometimes, when she smiled, it didn't reach her eyes. He wondered if she stayed out of pity or obligation or fear of being alone. "I wish I could believe you still love me," one line read, "but your silence has become too loud." By the time I finished reading, my chest felt hollow. The paper trembled in my hand. I could almost hear his voice, calm, resigned, aching. I imagined Elena sitting beside him, unaware he was carrying such thoughts. Anger came next. Not at my father, but at her for the quietness she wore so gracefully, for making me believe she was the only one hurting. When she returned that evening, I was sitting at the kitchen table, the letter folded neatly in front of me. She noticed it instantly. Her steps slowed. "You found it," she said, not as a question, but as a confession. "I wasn't looking for it," I said. "It just appeared." Her eyes flickered to the envelope. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The air felt sharp, like glass about to break. Did he really think that? I asked finally, my voice quieter than I intended. That you didn't love him? She closed her eyes. He did. And I never got the chance to convince him otherwise. I wanted to believe her, but the doubt my father had poured into that letter seeped into me too. I could hear it in every heartbeat, every pause. The rest of the evening passed in silence. She tried to speak once or twice, but I avoided her eyes. The connection we had built over weeks, the easy laughter, the quiet trust, it all felt brittle now. When I went to bed, I could hear her moving around downstairs. The sound of drawers opening, the soft creak of the back door. Then nothing. For the first time since she'd moved in, the house felt empty again. And I couldn't tell if the ache I felt was for my father, or for her. I didn't see her the next morning. Her bedroom door stayed closed, and the faint smell of coffee I'd grown used to never filled the air. The silence pressed against the walls like fog. I tried to focus on work, on anything, but the letter sat in my mind like a wound that refused to close. When evening came, I found her outside on the porch, sitting alone. The air was cool, the last light of the day washing her face in gold and gray. She didn't turn when I stepped out. She must have known I'd come. I thought about leaving today, she said quietly. I even packed a few things. My chest tightened. Why didn't you? She exhaled, her hands folded in her lap. Because running from pain doesn't make it disappear. It just follows you to the next house. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I could hear the crickets in the grass, the faint rustle of leaves. Then she turned to me, her expression unreadable. You read every word, didn't you? I nodded. She gave a small, sad smile. He wasn't wrong, you know. There was distance between us. But not because I stopped loving him. Because I started mourning him long before he died. I frowned. Mourning him? She looked away, eyes glistening in the soft moonlight. Your father was sick for years before he ever admitted it. He pushed me away to protect me, but all it did was make me feel like I was already losing him. I tried to reach him, but love isn't always enough when someone decides you shouldn't carry their pain. Her voice broke then, quiet, restrained, but it cut through me. I stayed, she continued, because I loved him. Because he needed someone to remind him he wasn't alone, even when he stopped believing in it. But he died thinking I'd given up on him. And I've had to live with that. I didn't realize I'd been gripping the porch railing until my knuckles turned white. I shouldn't have read it, I said finally. I didn't mean to, she shook her head gently. No. Maybe you needed to. Maybe we both did. The moonlight caught in her hair, silvering it like frost. She looked fragile and strong all at once, like someone made of both heartbreak and endurance. Without thinking, I stepped closer. You didn't fail him, I said, my voice low. He just couldn't see how much you were still fighting for him. Her eyes met mine then, tired, wet, searching. For a moment, everything stopped. The air between us was thin, trembling. I reached out, brushing away the tear that had escaped down her cheek. Her breath hitched, and my hand lingered longer than it should have. Liam, she whispered, my name trembling on her lips like something fragile. I stepped back before the moment could cross the line neither of us wanted to name. The night felt charged, sacred, and sad all at once. I'm sorry, I murmured. You didn't deserve that letter. And you didn't deserve to carry his ghosts, she said softly. But here we are. We stood in silence until the stars filled the sky. Somewhere in that quiet, forgiveness began to form, not spoken, not complete, but real enough to feel. When I finally went inside, I looked back once. She was still on the porch, her face turned toward the dark horizon like she was finally saying goodbye. Morning light seeped through the curtains, painting the small living room in a tender gold. The storm from the night before had passed, but its echo lingered in the silence between them. The woman sat on the couch, her hands folded over a mug of untouched coffee. The young man stood near the window, back turned, breathing shallow, as though one wrong word could break what little peace they still had. The truth was out now. Every hidden word. Every half-suppressed feeling. Every lie of omission. He had finally told her that what broke him wasn't her husband's death, it was realizing how deeply he had depended on her, emotionally and quietly, without understanding it. And she, in her loneliness, had leaned on him too, blurring the lines between comfort and longing. Now there was no pretending. No warm dinner tables or silent glances across the couch that could carry unspoken meanings anymore. Everything was bare, fragile, and real. She placed the mug down gently. "You were never supposed to carry my grief," she said softly. "That wasn't fair to you." He turned then, his face unreadable but his eyes trembling with something raw. "And I wasn't supposed to fall in love with you," he whispered, the words landing between them like the softest kind of heartbreak. "But I did." There was no shock in her face, only sadness, the kind that comes from a truth you've been waiting to hear but dreading to face. She stood, closing the distance between them until she could feel the warmth of his breath, smell the faint trace of coffee and tears. Her hand rose instinctively, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. That touch, tender, motherly, and yet not quite, said everything words could not. "I love you too," she admitted finally. "But not the way we both need." Her voice cracked, and he looked down, unable to meet her eyes. The pain wasn't loud. It was quiet, reverent, like saying goodbye to something sacred. They sat together for a long while, shoulders almost touching, but not quite. Outside, the world resumed, a dog barked, someone swept their front yard, the air smelled faintly of rain. Life was moving forward, even as they sat still. When she finally stood to leave, she turned to him one last time. "You'll be okay," she said. "You're stronger than you think. Just don't let what happened here make you afraid to love again." He smiled faintly, not out of happiness, but gratitude. "And you?" he asked. "I'll keep a piece of this," she said, touching her chest. Not as guilt, but as proof that I was still capable of feeling. As she walked out, the door closed softly behind her. No drama, no tears. Just the sound of quiet acceptance, the ending of a love that wasn't meant to be, but had changed them both forever. The truth had broken them, yes. But in its honesty, it had also set them free. And sometimes, that is the most human kind of love, the one that ends not with a promise, but with peace.